That's my GOAT right there. I mean, he's everybody's GOAT, and it's not that Volk being the greatest featherweight of all time was in question, but man, just add a massive capstone moment to his legacy. If he retired tomorrow or loses that thing outright next time he fights, there will still be that incredible win over Lopez last night to recapture the title after that devastating run that marked the demise of his initial title reign. That is forever now. It's MMA canon and one of the best highlights of Alex's career. I would put that equal to, if not on a higher level, than Randy Couture coming out of retirement to beat Tim Sylvia, even though he was, I believe, 87 years old on the night. I know, that is a very bold statement, but Randy had been defying age and the odds most of his career, and no offense to Tim Sylvia, but it felt like, oh, the reason Couture was able to, almost identically to Volk, show up a year after losing a title fight only to again capture gold in glorious fashion is because the heavyweight division was in shambles, and Sylvia was at the top of it. But I digress. Volkanovski came into that fight last night at 36 years old. He was the poster child for age catching up with you as a fighter. In fact, the two videos we've done recently about aging in the UFC have featured Volk in the thumbnail. It's such a cliche now, but it's a cliche because it's largely true. Father Time is undefeated. Nobody has two primes, except for George Foreman. All that stuff. And I'm not saying this is going to lay the groundwork for another long and prosperous title reign for Alexander the Great, but who knows? The guy is incredible, and he certainly seemed ambitious in his hopes to go back to being a fighting champion, so I suppose we shall see how long that can hold up. But again, this isn't about the future, this is about last night. To come in after the losses he'd faced back to back, that short notice devastating head kick KO by Islam, the second round knockout by Ilya to lose his featherweight title, and then to have sat on those losses for over a year, to have every single pundit and fan point out that at Volk's age, statistically, it's incredibly unlikely he's ever going to hold gold again, and then to carry all of that out there against an absolute animal in Diego Lopez, just about as good a representative of the new guard as you could get, and still put on the performance he did through 5 rounds despite getting knocked down, despite getting some bad cuts, despite getting some serious pressure from Lopez. That was a hard fight, and Volk could have easily crumbled under the pressure, under the weight of everything he brought into the cage, but he still went out there and he fought like it was 2021 again. That is the stuff of legends. I couldn't be happier for Volk, even though it wasn't reclaiming his gold from Topuria. It really was probably the next best thing. But truly, that fight wasn't about the opponent. Diego was an element of the story, but that was Volk versus Volk. Volk versus time. And he beat everybody's ass last night. And as for what's next, I mean, I guess we'll see. Yair seemed pretty adamant that he'd be getting a title shot off that win over Patricio Pitbull, and maybe that is in the works. Personally, I don't want to see that rematch just yet, but the suggestion that Rogan had, Lord Silva and El Pantera, throwing down to see who fights Volk next, man, sign me up for that one. We can let Alex rest for a bit. There's no rush right now in that division. Now, as awesome as Volk's win was, a story that was absolutely worthy of the top of the video and its title and thumbnail, we gotta talk about Paddy the Baddy. And that is truly the first time I personally have ever felt that way. I know oftentimes fans have strong reactions to how we at On Point feel about Pimblett, however you think it is we feel about him, but full disclosure, he's never been for me personally one that I felt I needed to think of as a potential main eventer. I just wasn't into it until last night. It was truly the perfect win. Paddy came out there with the typical swagger, the intangible stuff that sells tickets, but we've seen that plenty. That was never in question. It was whether or not he's an elite fighter, and I think he earned the right to get a chance to prove that. And as someone who has looked at Paddy's previous wins and said, well, who were any of those early guys he fought? The judges absolutely gifted him the Jared Gordon win. Tony Ferguson was in no place to be considered a test for anybody, as much as I hate to say that. And again, with all due respect to King Green, these were just not elite fights. They weren't. And so the non-believer in me going into this week already had caveats in my head. And it's hard to say, but Michael Chandler hasn't exactly had the best run in the UFC. So if Paddy narrowly defeated him, or Chandler did something really overly aggressive and got himself caught, I was fully ready to say, well, still not much of a test. But that's not at all how I feel. In fact, I think given the trouble that Chandler has had at the top of the UFC, if you're going to be a title contender, that is exactly the kind of victory you should be having over Mike. He kicked the shit out of him. That was the best that Paddy has ever looked in the octagon, and now I'm fully intrigued to see him in a title eliminator against somebody in that top 5. The performance has finally caught up up with the swagger and the annoying fans with the wigs and all that stuff. If somebody like me, who never really found much interest in him, is excited for his next fight for the first time, that fight is gonna be huge and special, especially if he can perform like that again. We've seen this story play out a bunch of times, and it's really simple. If your hype was massive coming in, like Paddy's was, there's gotta be that moment that you prove your hype, that you finally get skeptical fans on board, and Pimblett just had that. All right, so Paddy and Volk were the two big narratives coming out of 314, but it wasn't the only thing that happened in a hot night in Miami, so let's look at the numbers this thing produced and pass out some awards to wrap this thing up. The UFC's fourth ever trip to Vice City saw 13 fights with 6 KO TKOs, 2 submissions, 5 decisions, for a total cage time of 2 hours, 22 minutes, 47 seconds. It was almost all favorites, 11 earned wins by the end of the evening, with dogs defying the odds just 2 times. A big time bet for you would have been choosing Lord Silva taking out Bryce Mitchell via submission in the second round, because it was a plus 2,800 outcome. Massive payout there. When Dominic Reyes wins a fight, it's by knockout. At least that has been the trend going all the way back to 2019. Dom's 4 victories in that time, including the one last night, and the 3 he's had back-to-back are all KO TKOs. That is 5 in a row for Lord Silva in the UFC, with 5 finishes going back to his debut early last year. What a fucking nerd. Give that man our near-future main eventer award. That was Pitbull's first decision loss in a 3-round fight since 2010. The guy who beat him tonight, Yair Rodriguez, was 17 years old at the time. Speaking of, that's El Pantera's first victory in over 2 years. Also, dude was jacked out of his mind. No stat there, just shredded like a julienne salad. That was the 7th straight win for Paddy the Baddy in the UFC, and the biggest by a huge margin. That gives Pimblett the second longest win streak in the lightweight division, behind none other than champion Islam. Dude is 1 away from a title shot. He called the crowd a bunch of mushrooms. What a night for Liverpool. Michael Chandler is now officially 2-5 in the UFC. His only victories, Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson. And finally, in our main event, that was the biggest strike differential ever scored against Diego Lopez. That was Alex's 10th title fight in a row going back to 2019. Hard to fall off when you're at the very top. And as they mentioned on the broadcast, Volk became the first fighter over 35, under 155, to ever win a world title, earning him our Get Fucked Father Time award.
My kids these days, no respect.
And that is 314 all done and dusted. I cannot thank Max Randall enough for his legendary run on these autopsies. Gets them done faster than should be humanly possible. Please show him all the love on his socials and go check out his fantastic YouTube channel. A huge thank you to our channel members as well. Your support is what makes this kind of video so possible. If you want to become a member, hit the join button. There's a single price tier and exclusive content. Like and subscribe, because we do these after every single pay-per-view. Sound off in the comments everything you thought of last night's card. And thank you so much for watching. Catch you again next time, fight fans.